That just takes up space on now. You probably do this already. Everybody seems to, but I don't know. At the end of the mix, obviously now I use compression and an overall EQ, which feels a bit like cheating to me, but if it works, it works, yeah? The compressor should come first, because normally when you're adding overall EQ, you're going to be adding top end, and that's going to eat up the top end. If you're adding bottom end, it's definitely going to eat it up. You add the bottom end, and the compressor just starts working harder, and it'll ruin the other side of the mix, you know. So 10K, 11K, you know, don't be shy of using that. Quite often I find I'm adding a bit more than I would have liked to, 5-6 dB of it. But if it comes alive and you start getting the air in the sound, well, don't be too scared of it. Just don't get too much, you know, come back the next day and check, because sometimes we go a little too nutty. Obviously, there are 7 different kits here, and then some other snares that we did separately. And we were pretty diligent. I tuned all the drums myself, and most of them are open. There was one kit that we did that I'm very proud of, actually, that's a dead kit that I haven't done since maybe 1970 or 71 or something. Even used a tea towel on the snare for one of them, taped up the toms, detuned them, took the front head off the bass drum, and it sounded great. And I've forgotten, I mean, rather I remembered that's why we used to do it, because it is a fantastic sound. I would assume, though, that you wouldn't be using it with heavy metal type tunes, because I don't think that would work. It's the Ringo type of thing. So that's for acoustic songs or even, you know, pop type things. But whatever you want to use it for, I'm rather proud of that one. And also, because we use 7 kits and these other snares, you can mix and match. I mean, I would assume that you would do that, but you're not stuck with each kit. There were several snare sounds I was very happy with, and the bass drums are all reasonably different. I don't think we got a bad bass drum sound. Gosh. And the toms all sound pretty good too. Must have been a good couple of days, because it doesn't always work like that. So yeah, mix and match, find what you want. And like I said before, depending on the music, you tailor the sound to the music. You can sit and get the drum sound to be quite delightful on its own, but what you put it with is going to start covering up all kinds of things, especially the bottom end on the drums and the decay time. So, I mean, every time that you think you've got a good drum sound and you put enough instruments on top of it, if it's 2 rhythm guitars and some keys and then another rhythm guitar and vocals and, you know, the usual stuff, you're going to lose about half of that ambience. And half really ends up sounding like you've lost nearly all of it. So don't be scared to use that stuff. Obviously, when you're sitting there and you're mixing, you can control whatever you want, and I'm sure you'll figure it out. Most of the time, I use a non-linear reverb on the snare and the toms and the kick. And you know, I don't know what devices you're going to be having at home or at the studio or whatever, but that can be quite tasteful. Obviously, the faster the tune, the less you're going to hear that on the bass drum. And if you use too much of it, it starts sounding very programmed. But I use that all the time, and like everything else, I pan that in a bit, because if it's coming all the way from the sides, it sounds, you can hear that, you know. I get asked a lot about the drum sound from When the Levee Breaks with Led Zeppelin, and I'm understandably a little proud of that one, because it was the first time that we'd ever done anything, well, I had done anything with just 2 mics on the drums. I had done a session that year with Blind Faith where I recorded the drums, the vocals, and the acoustic and lute, I think it was, and vocals all at the same time on 2 mics, and it came out very well. So I been wanting to do that on drums for some time, and we went to this house called Headley Grange with the Stones truck, and I had actually wanted to go to this other house, but Jimmy thought it was a little too expensive, how unusual. So we rolled up, and it had this big lobby with stairs going up to landings, kind of like a hotel lobby or something, you know, smaller hotel. And I got a couple of M160s, which are very directional bio mics, double ribbon. I put those about halfway up the first set of stairs and compressed the crap out of them. And we also had a thing called a Binson Echarec, which is tough to find now, but it's a delay device. You can make the sound fairly easily with anything and put that in. And it was the first time I'd really heard Bonzo's drums sound like they did when you stood next to them. And it was the first time he didn't complain either. Because when I got that sound, that was my first reaction. Jesus, he's actually going to be happy at last. So that's how we did that. But good luck in getting that sound again, because you really do need Bonzo. We've done a sort of a pre-mix, more or less the way I would do things, but I haven't heard it with any other instruments, so it's a kind of a rough guess. I've done very little EQ, touched up the snare a tiny bit, a little bit of high mids I think is all, and the same thing with the bass drum. I've got the room mics where I think they ought to be, a tiny little bit of this non-linear verb, which is a fair representation of how I would balance the drums, I think. But as I had mentioned earlier, you know, without hearing it with the rest of the rhythm section and everything else, I'm just guessing. But that is more or less how I would do it. So if that's any value to you at all, have a listen and see what you think.